A very good evening. It is 9 o'clock. Welcome to the Spin Room here in New Broadcasting House in central London. So there we have it. We've had 90 minutes of debate. Our thanks to Michelle Hussein and the representatives from the 7 parties. This is the moment in the night where the journalists draw their conclusions, distill what they've heard through the debate and come to a conclusion. The headlines you will see tomorrow morning. But amid them all, the politicians who will circulate to try and mould and shape the impressions that we were left with. It is the first time in the general election campaign that the leading figures of these 7 parties have come together. There will be another debate next week on Thursday on ITV. Tonight's 90-minute debate did include some pretty angry exchanges between Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner and the Conservative Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt. We'll come to that very shortly. But of course, central to the beginning of the debate tonight, that row over the Prime Minister's decision to leave the beaches in Normandy, a decision he's apologised for. It was Penny Mordaunt, a naval reservist, someone who has an honorary command in the naval forces, who represents Portsmouth, who was there for the Conservatives to give their response. We'll play you a little bit of that very shortly. And of course, we'll get to the clips from all the various parties on the policies and how they see this campaign. With me is Leila Nathu. What did you make of it?
Very watchable, wasn't it? I thought it was quite courteous, quite a satisfactory watch. I think we sort of heard fairly from everybody. Quite an interesting focus, I think, when you think of the flashpoints you mentioned between Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt. One big flashpoint was over tax. Quite interesting to hear Penny Mordaunt repeat that £2,000 figure that we spent a lot of time dissecting the credibility of that when Rishi Sunak first mentioned it. Interesting to see that Penny Mordaunt went there again. Secondly, quite an interesting, angry exchange between Penny Mordaunt and Angela Rayner on defence. And I thought that was quite telling. Penny Mordaunt very keen to talk about the nuclear deterrent and question Labour's record on defence. Another thing that really stood out for me was Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader, the number of rounds of applause he got. He was the first to get rounds of applause, and quite interesting topics, I think, that got applause from the audience, of course, specially selected to represent different voters. So it's a carefully made up audience, live audience there. But interestingly, on Brexit, talked about the damage, in his words, the damage to the economy. Talked about an end to the demonisation of migration, another thing that Stephen Flynn said that got a round of applause, and also free tuition fees in Scotland. So that was interesting to me too. And I think the strategies, certainly from it became a kind of debate between Labour and the Tories, and the smaller party strategy was to essentially pick holes in both of their arguments. So I think a really interesting dynamic, but I thought really well managed and actually very well presented.
Let's go through some of the highlights, if we will, for starting with that debate on defence and the armed forces and that issue of Rishi Sunak's early departure from the D-Day commemorations. It was always going to come up. In fact, it was Nigel Farage who raised it first. Let's have a listen to him and the response from Penny Mordaunt.
Respect our veterans, including those with the average age of 100 who were deserted by the Prime Minister in Normandy yesterday, which I think was a complete and utter disgrace and shows us we actually have a very unpatriotic Prime Minister. It was dreadful.
But Penny Mordaunt, can you respond to that? Rishi Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations before the end of the day?
What happened was completely wrong, and the Prime Minister has rightly apologised for that. Apologised to veterans, but also to all of us, because he was representing all of us. I'm from Portsmouth. I've also been Defence Secretary, and my wish at the end of this week is that all of our veterans feel completely treasured. And I'm hoping tonight to convince you of some things that are important to them, important to their legacy. And I couldn't do that if I wasn't straight with you on that issue.
Would you have left D-Day early?
I didn't go to D-Day. I think what happened was very wrong. I think the Prime Minister has apologised for that.
Well, let's get some response to that, shall we? Laura Trott is with me, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Hello, thank you for joining us. Penny Mordaunt said it was very wrong of the Prime Minister not to be there yesterday. Has he let you all down?
Look, it's been a really tough day, if I'm being honest, Christian. It really has. I mean, I think that the Prime Minister has been really clear that he made a mistake. It's one of the things actually I really respect about him, that he fronts up things, and it was a huge mistake, it's a big mistake. But I think Penny was really clear this evening that what is important is that our record on veterans, on what we've done, we are proud as a
country for the service that they have provided, and we've tried really hard through the work that Johnny has done, the work the Prime Minister has done, to value that as much as we can.
I looked at the polls the other day. It is one of the areas, defence, where you lead Labour.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister's just driven, if you'll pardon the pun, a tank all the way through it, because you set out a policy on national service. You've got a Prime Minister here who's saying, I couldn't wait the afternoon to meet the veterans. I'm going to go home for an interview with ITV.
Well, hang on a second. I mean, we talked about defence in this debate this evening, and I thought it was actually a really illuminating discussion, because the most important thing I think was said this evening was what Penny said to Angela when she turned around and said, actually, do you know what? You've lost all credibility on the nuclear deterrent because you have said that you don't support it. And the nuclear deterrent is fundamental to our nation's security. So if we're talking about defence here, if we're talking about what's really, really important, what we know is the Labour Party have actually undermined that, and that is absolutely vital. That's something people really need to be thinking about in this election.
Secretary of the Treasury, you heard what Nigel Farage said about troop numbers. You're trying to put 30,000 young people into the armed forces. We're at 72,000. That's the lowest figure since the Napoleonic Wars.
What we're also talking about here is about how much money we are going to be spending on defence, right? And again, that was discussed this evening.
Well,
We've said we're
going
to. No, we haven't. Money's gone up in terms of how much we've been putting into the armed forces since 2010 in real terms. But what we're saying is that we are going to put 2.5% into defence by 2030. Labour have not matched that commitment. Angela Rayner this evening said that they were going to do it. It's unclear whether she meant that, how it's being funded. I'm sure they'll clarify that later on this evening. But that is a really big dividing line. There is a clear choice at this election. We've just talked about it in terms of defence and defence spending, and people at home really need to think about that when they're going to the polling booths.
What did you say to your civil servants in the Treasury this week, who you effectively have thrown under a bus? You said they've come up with these figures. They're not independent, are they?
No. What has happened is a very long established process, which has been used, by the way, frequently by opposition parties going back to the 1980s. What they've done is there's 27 costings in this paper that we put out. 21 of those are done by the Treasury civil servants. You've got a couple in here where we've taken Labour's claims at face value. I think that's reasonable. I mean, lots of independent experts actually say things like their energy plan is going to cost a lot more money. But we didn't take those figures, we took Labour's figures. And then there's a couple of independent analysis, and we've put them together. It's obviously right that the civil service are not involved in how we present a paper, but the costings involved in that, the 21 costings were absolutely from the Treasury, and it was very clear that that was how it was drawn up.
Yeah, Fraser Nelson's done the same thing for The Spectator. He's come back on your figures and he said it will be 3,000.
The thing, do you know what's really important? Is that at this election, we've got to have a clear choice and arguments about policies and how they're going to be funded, right? And what the Labour Party are trying to do is have an argument about a process rather than what they're actually putting forward. Because it's perfectly legitimate, by the way, to say that you're going to raise taxes in order to do more breakfast clubs. Like, that is a legitimate argument that you could have. But they're trying not to have that. They're trying to say that they're going to do all these policies and not pay for them. That's not okay.
But Fraser Nelson's saying you're more expensive.
The way the government works is obviously we have to show how everything's paid for, right? We have to do the autumn statements and budgets. We have to show how we're funding all of our policies. And we've done that the whole way along. And what we've been very clear in terms of where we've made commitments now, we've been clear about how we're going to fund them.
Well, the IFS say you haven't been very clear. They say the option before the people, and they blame Labour for this as well, is that you can either cut public services or you can put taxes up. You won't find the growth in the short term in order to do what you're both saying you can do.
So to be clear, that's not about the costing of our individual policies. That's basically saying that the amount of money we're spending will not be enough. Now, on that, the amount of money we're going to spend will be higher in real terms by the end of the next Parliament, by around £80 billion, right? Real term spending is going to be going up in the next Parliament, and we've been absolutely clear about that.
But how can you have a debate, seriously have a debate, about taxation and put all this on Labour when you are sitting on top of the highest tax hike in 70 years?
Look, we've had to make some difficult decisions. Everyone at home knew we had to spend a lot of money on COVID, 400 billion quid, and then we had the energy price spikes due to Putin's war in Ukraine. We had to pay for those, right? We had to make some difficult decisions. Everyone at home understands that. But what we've done is by careful stewardship of the nation's finances, we're now bringing that tax burden down, right? The national insurance cuts that we made, cuts that are worth £900 on average to people at home, and that's the direction that we are going to go in. We've said we want to go further when economic conditions allow. So that is what you set out from us. And you contrast that with the £2,000 of extra taxes that the Labour Party will put on every single family if they follow through on the policies that they put out. Now, they may say that they don't want to do those policies, but that's what they've got to have the conversation about. You mustn't let them, Christian, just say, oh, this is a process route. Either they're going to do those policies or they're not going to do those
Well, we'll
policies.
certainly
And if
put
they
the
do that,
questions to them.
I look forward to you doing it later on this
Did
evening.
Penny Mordaunt look like a leader to you?
I thought she looked fantastic. She was magnificent this evening. But she's a brilliant cabinet member and she did a brilliant job for us
More
tonight.
more prime ministerial than the current
Oh,
incumbent?
no, that's not true at all. I think Penny did an amazing job tonight. Honestly, I was really proud to be watching her and I thought she was fab.
Laura Trott, good to
Thank
see
you.
you. Thank you. Well, let's just focus on that, shall we? While we invite Labour in to give a response to that. We'll focus on the row over taxation. It was between Labour and Conservative, most of it anyway. Have a watch.
We have got to cut people's taxes and we have got to alleviate burdens on business. Angela Rayner and the Labour Party, Keir Starmer confirmed this earlier this week, they are going to put up your taxes by £2,000.
That's a lie.
By
Penny Mordaunt,
£2,000 per
That is a
working
lie. And
household.
Penny, your
2,000
government
Well, what is it
have
then,
raised
Angela?
taxes to
What
the
is
record
it?
level in 70
What
years.
is, yeah,
the last
we
Parliament,
have, and we've hated
26
putting
different
taxes up. We have now been cutting taxes. We will continue to cut taxes. The country can
Mordaunt,
afford it.
You're using
£2,000.
Penny Mordaunt.
You
Penny Mordaunt,
can't
you're using a
afford
figure that's been
£2,000.
criticised by
I'm
the
standing by
UK
that figure.
statistics
Treasury
watchdog.
costings and Labour's
Why don't you
own
stand by your
numbers.
record?
And you'll see it.
Record levels
You'll
of
see
taxes
it.
on working people.
Well, we've
26
heard
separate
overnight-
tax hikes
we've
in the
heard
last
overnight
Parliament.
about 12 new taxes
That's
that
rubbish.
Labour are going to bring in. It's
Absolute
not
rubbish. We've
What is it then?
absolutely guaranteed we will not
how are
raise
you gonna
taxes
close
for
that
working
gap?
people in this
How
country.
are you going to close that gap? £2,000 per working household. Answer- Which
to-
policies are you going to take out of your manifesto?
We've been
Which ones
clear
are you
how
ditching?
we would pay for our
No, you
manifesto.
haven't.
Okay, it's
So
time.
we said that we would level
It's time to hear from the others.
Pay for our
Angela Rayner,
teachers.
it's time to hear from the others. Carla Denyer.
Well, that was terribly dignified, wasn't it?
Not very, was it? And so it went on through the course of the debate. Jonathan Reynolds, Shadow Business Secretary, is with me. Hello.
Good evening.
Maybe you could respond to some of what we just heard from Laura Trott, who again is returning to the £2,000 figure. She said, you need to be much clearer about where this money's coming from. So can you do that for us?
Well, it's a lie. It's been established to be a lie. If the Conservative Party still want to use it, they've got to explain why they're lying, but we do know it's a lie. I thought their strategy tonight, which was to repeat that lie, was a mistake. It will bring into question their own integrity. I was also, to be frank, taken aback by just how hard Penny Mordaunt went in on the Prime Minister. I mean, a lot of our attack on the Conservative Party is the chaos they've caused. Well, you can see if they somehow got through this general election, that chaos would continue. So look, that's their case, that's down to them. For us tonight, Angela Rayner did exactly what we wanted her to do. Talk to the country, use the connection she's got with people to tell them that if you want change, and you want change that will be delivered, tangible difference to your life, it's Labour that can do that. She straight talking Angela, won this hands down.
This list of 20 or so policies which you've put forward, how are you going to spend the money? How are you going to find the money? Because it's not all going to come from growth. And the IFS has been very clear that you can't find it in taxation unless you put taxes up.
Look, on the specific commitments that form part of our 6 first steps, those are all very clearly laid out as to how they will be funded, whether it is getting rid of the loopholes in the non-dom changes to the tax regime for non-doms, whether it is the taxation of private education, whether it is the changes to how private equity income is taxed. Those all recognise that. Now, this question about the IFS report, I accept that what they are saying there is, if you were to continue with an economy that has performed as it has for 14 years under the Conservative Party, why are taxes high but services are poor? It's because growth has been low. Now, a huge part of Labour's agenda is identifying that and correcting that. That is our changes to the planning system, to industrial strategy, to the apprenticeship levy, to how Brexit works, to our green prosperity plan. I recognise the case they're making, which is more of the same, will give you even worse outcomes than you've had for 14 years. But that is why we want to change that. That's why we believe the practical things we put forward can make that difference. So we're not in a return to the kind of austerity which has caused so much damage under the Conservative Party.
Penny Mordaunt pointed, Jonathan, to the cuts in spending in Wales, where Labour is in charge. 4 times the NHS budget has been cut, and the waiting lists are 4 times as big.
Well, First of all, this is a UK general election, and it's going to be based on the record of the incumbent Conservative government. So them sort of saying, look over here, look over there. No, they've got to be honest and acknowledge their record. In Wales, it is not a straightforward comparison. What the UK footprint is for any public service will obviously then have an impression on the devolved governments. That is just how it is. But look, Welsh colleagues will defend, in a Welsh election, their record. This is about the UK general election.
Can we trust Labour with the deterrent? Because, as Penny Mordaunt said, half the shadow front bench voted to scrap Trident. In fact, Angela Rayner was one of them.
I do not believe that is true. Yes, people can trust Labour on the deterrent. They can trust us because not only are we absolutely committed to the deterrent and to NATO, we were the political party that was, in many ways, the driving force for the creation of NATO, for the nuclear deterrent after the end of the Second World War. It's part of our legacy, it's part of our history, and the Labour Party's role in those conflicts, in making sure that we were protecting the interests of British people and always putting security and defence first. Look at our record. That's why people can trust us. Look at our record.
Looking at your record, you set out a £28 billion green fund and then you U-turned on it.
To be clear, Liz Truss blew up the economy. Interest rates went from 0.1% to 4.75%, and so you have to change your plans. There's no point telling people you can see the kind of damage, the devastation caused by a Liz Truss, and then say there's no impact of that. If the cost of borrowing goes up, that's not just more to borrow that money to invest, it's more to service the debt that the UK has. We were clear on that, but we still have the most ambitious programme on that Green Prosperity Plan, whether it's on energy efficiency, the creation of GB energy.
Is it ambitious? Because you've had your meeting today on the manifesto, and you'll have heard the response from Unite and from Momentum, who say it's overly cautious, it's not ambitious enough.
Well, it's the biggest energy efficiency and fuel poverty programme in British history if we get the chance to implement it.
What about the 2-car cap?
Look, there are many things that I would love to be able to say we will be able to get rid of, but they all cost money, and if we can't say exactly how we would pay for that, we can't do it. If I was on here tonight pledging the money to get rid of the 2-child limit, you might then say, well, what about the benefit cap overall? You might then say, what about local housing allowance, which is in such a dire state? There are so many problems. I acknowledge that. We acknowledge that. But that is why our 6 first steps answers the question of there's so much going wrong in the UK. Where do you even start? Well, that's how you start, and then those aspirations for the national renewal the UK needs all come from that.
OK. It's important that I ask you these questions because one of the audience questions tonight was about the promises made in a campaign like this that once the party gets into government are not followed up on. They're not followed through. Keir Starmer set out a platform of policies when he ran for the leadership, which he's almost entirely scrapped.
I don't think that is true, because if you look at his ambitions on climate, on workers' rights, on the economy, on housing, those are all reflected. Now, in the leadership election, he was setting out his principles that he wishes to be judged upon. It is not the same as a manifesto 4 or 5 years later. No one believes that. But I think you can look at Keir, his record, credible public servant, what he has delivered in his career, the fact he went into politics still motivated by public service. Follow his early political career, look at what he is now offering if he becomes the Prime Minister, and see that consistent thread, that decency, that commitment to public service, that commitment to change so working people have better lives. That is what Keir and the Labour Party are all about.
Just before I let you go, the line tonight from Jonathan Ashworth was that you are going to recognise Palestinian statehood before the peace process is concluded. Are you prepared to have a conversation with the Israeli government about that?
Look, we have had a commitment to recognising a Palestinian state for quite some time now. I think if you look at understandably how frustrated, how angry everybody is about the appalling human suffering on either side of the conflict, you realise there is a generation of British people and people around the world who have not seen a meaningful peace process. It's different to when I was young, when you did, difficult as it was, see actual tangible steps going forward. We've got to make the conversation not about if there's peace in Israel and Palestine, but how we deliver peace and what it looks like. And recognising Palestinian statehood, I believe, is a step towards that. Let's talk about the detail of that peace settlement, not whether or not it happens.
Jonathan Reynolds, it's good to talk. I think I might have got your name wrong at the beginning. If I did, I'm very, very sorry. I was grasping for my notes to ask you the questions that I had here, and I might have got that wrong. So my apologies if I did. But it's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming. Right, let's focus on the spending on health, which was another big issue in the debate. Let's get a little bit of that, and we'll talk about it off the back.
There are countries right next door to us. There's one country, France, that has a very, very different way of funding the NHS. It's rather like those that can afford, through their taxes, pay into an insurance scheme. Those that can't afford it don't pay in, so it's for the mutual benefit of everybody, and it's managed as if it was a private company, and their returns on stroke, heart and cancer are better than ours for exactly the same sum of money.
The King's
we
Foundation.
get a fully functioning NHS.
The King's Foundation.
If we spend our money
which is a
properly,
respectable...
and we're not spending our money properly, and that's the point.
Daisy, you'll have to make it very brief because I need to get to Carla
The
Denny.
Hill
She hasn't had a
Foundation,
say
the
on
King's
this.
Fund have done an analysis of different funding models. They don't materially make a difference to people's health outcomes. What makes a big difference, most of all, is the amount of money you put into your health service.
And the Green Party.
And independent
France,
experts say.
I'd like...
France, it works. Let's learn from it.
Well, a lot of the debate tonight was about how much money there is in the economy for our public services, and only one appearance tonight about the big elephant in the room, and that is Brexit and how it's affected the UK economy, something that the SNP leader in the House of Commons, Stephen Flynn, turned to.
That is why at this election you need to ignore the snake oil salesman who delivered Brexit, and you need to challenge the Labour Party and the Conservative Party about why they aren't seeking to rejoin the single market, why they aren't seeking to double down on making sure that we return to freedom of movement, and why we aren't investing in our renewables future.
And our exports are at a record high.
Penny, you know for a fact that Brexit has wiped £40 billion worth of tax receipts out of the UK economy. You did that because you were terrified of Nigel Farage. The worrying thing for me, though, is it's not Nigel. It's the silence of the Labour Party when it comes to the damage of Brexit. Silence on £18 billion of cuts, silence on Brexit. The public deserve better, and the SNP will provide it.
Well, let's get the reaction from some of the other parties. With me is Liz Lloyd, former SNP advisor to Nicola Sturgeon, but here in an independent capacity tonight, not speaking officially for the SNP. Also here, Sean Kemp, former Liberal Democrat advisor, and also Dr. David Appel, deputy leader of Reform UK. Welcome to you all. Thank you for coming. We were just hearing from Leila Nathu that she thought Stephen Flynn had a very good night tonight, but on that specific issue of Brexit, why do you think it's not part of the debate?
I think it's not part of the debate for the very reason Stephen set out. There's a bit of a conspiracy of silence, is what the language he used tonight was, around Westminster parties and the way that Westminster operates, that means that Brexit's been accepted despite the harm it's doing to the economy. So it's not in Labour's interest to raise it because they're trying to win back voters who voted for Brexit. It's not in the Tories' interest to raise it. It's not even in Nigel Farage's interest to raise it because it exposes how bad it was and how bad it's been for the economy. Stephen was the only one on stage there tonight saying, actually, this has done harm, this has done damage, and we shouldn't be just accepting that this is how it has to be. And he'll be really pleased with that performance tonight, as will the SNP, because his goal tonight was to position Labour and the Tories as being very much the same, arguing with each other over the minutiae and missing out the big issues that people are concerned about: austerity, the impact of Brexit, the cost of living crisis. And he did that really well tonight.
David, he said, don't believe what this snake oil salesman, Nigel Farage, is offering you. Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster.
And he is entirely incorrect. The fact is we haven't Brexited properly. We've ignored Northern Ireland. We've annexed Northern Ireland. The Windsor Protocol is an absolute travesty. It should go immediately. And actually the whole point about this is to bring back sovereignty to the United Kingdom, to make this
So what would you do to make
great
Brexit
again.
work?
So the whole deal was wrong. Theresa May let us down in the way that she actually bowed down to the European Union. So we want to do a number of things.
She did that to keep the Northern Ireland border open.
Yes, but what they've done is an absolute mess, isn't it? Because actually Northern Ireland is no longer part of the United Kingdom. We've annexed it. We've put a border in the Irish Sea, and that is totally unacceptable.
Sean, did Brexit get enough of an airing tonight?
Well, it got more of an airing. It's gone through the rest of the election campaign. I mean, if only there'd been some warning during the referendum campaign that Northern Ireland might be an issue. It got more than it has in the rest of the campaign, I guess. I think it's true that a lot of the parties don't really want to discuss it for various reasons. Partly also just because of fatigue from voters, I think, who were just sick of how long the whole thing dragged on, the negotiations and so on. It was I was glad to see it get a bit of an airing. I'd like to hear it get a little bit more of one. I know most people are fed up with it, but we do need to have an honest discussion about what the impact of Brexit has been, whether it's been the right kind of Brexit or whether there isn't such a format. We've kind of not discussed that at all in a few weeks now of a general election campaign.
Why are the main parties so loath to talk about the benefits of migration?
Because I think they know what they hear on the doorstep, which is people do have concerns about the impacts of migration. And in terms of housing and public services, it's become a stick to beat them with. And look, they do sometimes talk about the benefits of immigration, but I think, to be frank, there is a judgment call that is made by the two main parties in particular that if you say the truth, which is that businesses are crying out for more immigration because there is a skills gap at the moment, and if you include skills training, there needs to be a bridge where you need people to come in and actually support on that. It doesn't, look, it's not playing well on the doorstep, it's not playing well with like, popular media and so on. And that means that they just shy away from it.
But the public doesn't say the same thing. 2.5 million people coming in 2 years into this country. Stephen Flynn, Nigel was absolutely right. Nigel said, oh fine, open the borders, let everyone in. That is not the right policy.
When you talk about migration in Scotland, you've got a demographic challenge. There is a shortage of working age people. And Scottish businesses want more people and they want more migration.
So why don't
and
you
that's what
train
Stephen Flynn's
from
talking
the United Kingdom?
There is a shortage of working age people. It's not about, them
million
not being
economically
trained.
inactive people.
It's not about them not being trained.
still
It's about the
need people now.
demographic projections for Scotland. And actually what you saw from the audience, you saw a really warm reaction to someone who did speak positively about migration and who was willing to take on the rhetoric that's coming from Labour, the Tories and Reform.
Are you saying then to people in Scotland, if you want open borders, vote for us?
It's about having a system of migration that actually supports your economy, that brings in the people that you need, rather than artificially shuts the door on them. You know, Scotland needs people of working age to come from all sorts of places with their skills, with their talent to support our businesses. It's one of the key business asks in the Scottish economy. And it's ridiculous that Labour, the Tories, all sign up to this low migration position when there are parts of the UK, still in the UK, that are suffering from that.
Are you at risk of stigmatising a whole generation of very patriotic young British Muslims who do speak English and do speak Urdu and do speak various languages? Because that is what Nigel Farage is particularly hinting to. He is saying there are streets in the United Kingdom where people don't speak English.
What he said was 25% of 18 to 25-year-old Muslims believed in jihad.
Right, so he did talk about Muslims.
This is not what he said tonight, but 50% of those also don't believe what happened on October the 7th. So there is a major problem here. But also this shows that multiculturalism in this country does not work.
What would you do
what
to
we
address
want
that?
is uniculturalism. We need to be bound by British values. We actually need to teach British values. And just going back to your point, why don't you actually make sure that people come from England, from Wales, for example,
Actually, do you
into
know
Scotland, and don't import them from foreign countries?
Do you know what? More people have come from England and Wales to work in Scotland over the last couple of years than before. That is happening, and it's happening because the SNP is offering people a better quality of life and offering people less of this kind of rhetoric.
One thing that affects a lot of people and worries a lot of parents out there is knife crime.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought it was quite interesting that Daisy, the deputy leader of the Lib Dems, talked about community policing, which has disappeared, she said, in some parts of the country. And also there was a discussion, I think it was from the leader of Plaid, that there isn't in this country a discussion about youth workers, about youth centres where we can get hold of young people and educate them about the dangers of knife crime.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think it's indicative of a failure of public policy across the board. You can also look at things like public health, where we tend to focus a lot about things that happen at the end where things have gone wrong, whether it's prisons, court policy or hospitals. We don't think enough about prevention, early intervention and so on, partly because they're not politically the sexy topics and they cost a lot of money, so they tend to get forgotten. Then we end up having debates like this where we suddenly realise that actually if we spent a little bit more time worrying about those than we should have done, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we do now.
Just on the issue of stop and search, it's a very controversial issue.
Is it?
Well, it is if you're stopping and searching without suspicion.
Well, I think Nigel made a great point, which is essentially we've allowed people to steal up to 200 quid and you get away with it. You know, I was on the tube the other day and there were...
But about this specific issue, about stop and search without suspicion.
Right.
You know how that's been done in the United States.
Indeed.
And the problem that leads to.
So what we believe is actually we need to have zero tolerance, and you need to start with what Giuliani did in New York. You need to have zero tolerance and start with those low-level crimes. That's what breeds this sort of epidemic of crime. And I've seen it in shops myself. People go in, I'm sure you have, where people go in and take goods off the shelves and just walk out and no one does anything about it. And that blights communities as well.
David, Sean, Liz, thank you very much indeed for your company this evening. Lots to get through, lots of people to talk to, but it's lovely to get your company. Thank you very much for that. Let's talk about immigration in a bit more detail and hear from the smaller parties. So here is Plaid and the Greens talking about their view on immigration.
Nigel Farage wants to make this an immigration election for his own self-interest. Let's change the tone. Let's change the tone of the debate on immigration. You know, too much of it is framed around, frankly, the bigotry of people like Nigel Farage.
Please. Is that the best you can do?
Penny Mordaunt can't stand up to Nigel Farage because she wants her party to be like Nigel Farage.
They're the opposite.
Angela Rayner can't stand up to Nigel Farage because of the shift in her party to the right. Plaid Cymru will stand up to Nigel Farage.
Open doors,
on
everyone
immigration.
come.
Of course we need rules.
Come.
Of course we need
Benefits
rules.
for everybody, lovely.
Of course we need rules on borders.
I am clear that the reason for these services being run into the ground is not people coming here, whether they're coming here fleeing violence and persecution as asylum seekers, or whether they're coming here to work in many of our understaffed sectors like health and social care. If you meet a migrant in the NHS, they're more likely to be treating you, as I was the last time I saw a GP, than being ahead of you in the queue. Migration's been a good thing for this country. And so in the Green Party, our immigration policy is not about arbitrary numbers. That's why we're not talking about caps. Instead, it's about making our immigration system fairer and more humane.
Carla Denyer there from the Greens, the co-leader of the Greens, and also Rhaina Piotroweth from Plaid Cymru. I've got two representatives with me who we spoke to a little earlier, Zach Polanski, Deputy Leader of the Green Party, and Heleth Fachan, Plaid Cymru's member of the Senate. Thank you for coming. On that issue of immigration, has immigration depleted our public services?
No, and I thought Sheen did brilliantly in saying what was needed and standing up against Nigel Farage and his divisive and dangerous politics. Leanne Wood put him in his place back in 2015 and Rhaina Piotroweth did this time, and Labour and Conservatives were far too quiet on this. Migration benefits Wales, benefits the United Kingdom, and we need to change the narrative, and I'm proud that Sheen did that.
But does it? Because the point that was made through the debate is that 4 times health has been cut in Wales, and the waiting lists are 4 times as big. And you were part of the government. You had an arrangement with the Labour leadership in the Senate, so perhaps you're to blame for that.
Sheen made it very, very clear that the NHS was not part of the cooperation agreement because we do not agree with Labour on this issue. If we were in charge, then we would see that investment in public service. And what we want to see is fair funding for Wales so that we can deliver for the people of Wales. And he was very clear. He wasn't trying to play a politics. He was talking about politics that would make policies that would make a difference in people's lives. And through the cooperation agreement, we were able to ensure that every child in a primary school in Wales receives a free school meal. Those are transformative policies, and that's why we need Plaid Cymru representatives in Westminster fighting for Wales, because Labour certainly won't.
Zach, Nigel Farage says decarbonisation won't happen, it's unaffordable, it's unattainable. What we're doing is sacrificing manufacturing and growth, and we are exporting our carbon emissions.
I think Carla Denyer put it very well when she said the fact checkers will be busy. Almost every word that came out of Nigel Farage's mouth tonight on net zero and on tackling the climate crisis wasn't true. This doesn't have to be some kind of huge sacrifice. Actually, tackling the climate crisis is a way of tackling the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, the disability pay gap. It's a way of investing in green jobs, making sure we've got cleaner air, more cohesive communities. And it links to this point, and I agree with every single word. Migration is not something we tolerate in this country. It's something we should celebrate. And actually, to hear the audience applauding should have told those 2 old parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, who are constantly racing to the right on migration, that actually what they're doing is wrong. And the people in this country are decent. They want to see communities brought together. They want to see them celebrated, and actually we are stronger together. I hope the Labour Party and Conservative Party heard that very loud, because the Green Party will always stand up for migrants.
But they also want houses, they also want places at their GP surgeries, they also want places in schools, and the people who support Nigel Farage in many communities around the UK say the reason they don't get that is because there's too many people.
Well, and I can understand people's concerns. There's a lack of housing, it's hard to get an NHS appointment. Good luck getting a dentist. These problems aren't the problems of migrants, though. These are the
10 million extra people, he said, since Tony Blair.
Well, we're going to need some of those people to work in the NHS because we've got so many vacancies. But actually, these are not the problems of migrants. These are the problems of 14 years of underinvestment under the Conservative government, and before that, under the Labour Party and their PFI initiatives, which have left the NHS in huge amounts of debt. spend. Ultimately, we need to be investing in our public services, and if Labour won't make that argument, the Green Party will.
Do you support the Green Party's Green Transition Plan?
I think it was very, very clear tonight that there is a progressive option in England for the Green Party, in Scotland the SNP, and in Wales Plaid Cymru. We offer solutions, and the Green Deal we have in our manifesto are things that would deliver for our communities, lower energy bills, but ensure that Wales benefits from the richness of its natural resources.
No, it's just interesting because I've heard many of these arguments in France. The Green Party did very well at the last European parliamentary elections, and they're going to get clobbered on Sunday. They're going to lose around 40% of their seats, and that's because they've put the cost of the transition on the back of the working people.
Well, let's have the election first of all and see how the votes actually go. But I think your challenge is fair. As Green Party politicians, it's our responsibility.
There's a green lash underway in Europe.
People often think that being green is about being middle class, and actually it's about protecting working people. And I think Green Party politicians have a real responsibility to point out that actually the green transition is protecting the poorest communities the most, the marginalised communities the most, disability communities. All of these people need protecting, and ultimately we need to make sure that the just transition is being funded by multimillionaires and billionaires, and ultimately everyone can benefit from this, because we all benefit from a more equal society, and that's real hope and real change, and that's what you get with the Green Party.
There was just a quick word on the First Minister of Wales. It seemed to be a reaction from the audience that he should go.
Yes, and I hope Labour Party in Wales are listening, because we need to get on with delivering for Wales. If we can't have a First Minister in Wales, and perhaps a UK Labour government, where the First Minister can't fight for Wales and ensure that we get the fair funding we deserve, then what hope do we have? We need a First Minister that will work for Wales. We don't have one currently.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, Helen. Thank you very much, Zach. Thank you for your company this evening. Well, there was a very intense debate about tax, particularly over that £2,000 figure that the Conservatives have thrown at Labour. So let's get some clarity on that. Nick Eardley is with the Verify team. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Christian. Yeah, a lot of claims in there tonight, a lot to keep our team of fact checkers busy here at BBC Verify, and we have been going through the statistics to figure out what's right and what's not. Let's just start with that one you mentioned. This big row reigniting over whether Labour would put up tax by £2,000. It's a row that's dominated the week. Several times Penny Mordaunt said it again, but we've looked at this a lot in great detail. The figure that Penny Mordaunt's using is misleading. It's not clear it's over 4 years, and the figures behind it are dubious. Like the Conservatives, Labour's promise not to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT during the next Parliament. So that row came up again, and it's fair to say that £2,000 claim from Penny Mordaunt is misleading. Let's look next at the row over cuts. You heard Stephen Flynn from the SNP say several times that this was going to happen, that there were going to be £18 billion of spending cuts after the general election, whether Conservatives or Labour are in power. Let me explain quickly where he got this from. This is based on an analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They say that because Labour and the Conservatives are promising not to put key taxes up or to borrow for everyday spending, and because economic growth is slow, spending will be squeezed. And look at this. This is where Stephen Flynn is getting that figure from. Although day-to-day spending is going up a small bit, there are protected areas of spending: NHS, defence, schools, aid, childcare. And that means that unprotected areas like transport, like many other things, are going to see cuts. £18 billion worth of cuts is the figure the IFS came up with. So that's where he got that from. But it's really important because he was using that in the context of the health debate. Health is protected, so it isn't going to be part of those cuts. We've talked a lot today about defence, and there was a big debate on it at the start. Two claims that I thought were worth just exploring from that debate. One is Nigel Farage's claim: has defence spending fallen in real terms since Labour were last in power? So since the Conservatives came in 2010, the answer is yes. If you have a look here, this is what the figure was in real terms in 2009, 2010. Have a look at it here. It's slightly below. So it is right to say that the defence budget is lower now in real terms than it was when Labour left power. Secondly, there was a claim that the army has shrunk under the Conservatives. That's not coming up on that screen, but we have gone through that claim, and it does show that. It does show that the army has fallen to about 70,000 from a peak of about 100,000. So a couple of claims there that were true, some claims that were quite complicated, one that we think was misleading. There is a lot more of this stuff, Christian, on the BBC News website, on the live page. We've been fact-checking throughout the thing, so if you want to go and see a bit more of what the team's been up to, it's on there. We're going to keep going through some of those numbers and we'll come up with some more later.
Good work so far. Plenty more to come from Nick and his team. Do have a look on the Verify website on bbc.co.uk/news. Now, we got lots of live questions from the audience tonight, some really good questions as well. Let's listen to two of them, one from Lucy Hobday and the other from Linda Myers.
What matters to you more, economic growth or successful climate policy?
Why is it when parties want your vote, they promise things, but when they're elected, nothing gets done?
Well, by the powers of television, I've got Lucy and Linda standing right next to me. Lovely to see you. Well done tonight. Lucy, let me start with you. What matters to you most, economic growth or climate policy? Did you get an answer?
No, I definitely didn't, which I expected. Everyone wants to have both because the voter wants to have both, so you kind of be shooting your party in the foot if you outright said one. So I understand that that's just politics, but it felt frustrating to kind of see everyone kind of talk around the subject.
So if there was one party that you were leaning towards from the answers you got, would it be
Greens?
The Greens, right, OK. And what is it particularly about the Green policy that you like?
I think not even just green policy, but the whole green concept that they are a party dedicated or kind of starting with climate change, because I do think it is what we should all be looking to as our number one issue in the UK and our number one issue for now and the future. And so I think other parties trying to include it as part of a kind of grand scheme of we'll give you everything, you know, you can have your cake and eat it. I think that's untrue. I think it's misleading the voters, and I think it's a real threat to the UK going forward.
Do you at all worry about this point that Nigel Farage made, that some of it is not attainable, that we're fixing the figures, exporting some of our emissions abroad, and actually, as I think Penny Mordaunt made the point, that you're putting the cost of that on the backs of working people who are already dealing with a cost of living crisis?
I never thought I'd say this, but I did agree with Nigel Farage when he was talking about exporting our emissions and how it gives us a false kind of sense of security. I think that's completely correct. I do think that it's very convenient in a kind of wealthy Western country to export our rubbish abroad, to export much of our production abroad, and then not check the kind of quality of the work that has been done, not check the impact on the environment, even though we are the ones that are funding it, we're just not the ones that then go on and process it. I think to use working people as a kind of get out when talking that the climate policy is too expensive, I think is wrong and it is unfair, because it is the poorest people in society who will suffer the most when climate change kind of becomes more and more evident in our daily lives. If your house is flooded and you couldn't afford home insurance, you couldn't afford a new house, and then you're stuck homeless. You know, so I do think it's a complete cop-out.
Okay, well that was a very popular question with our viewers, but also this one from Linda. Why do politicians make promises and then do something completely different when they're in office? Did you feel satisfied with the response you got?
No, not at all, because they kept going off the subject all the time and fighting with each other. It was like children in the school playground.
Yeah.
I don't.
What is it that prompted you to ask that question?
Because so many times before elections they promise so much, but nothing ever comes of it. Nothing materialises.
So you voted Conservative, did you?
I did up to 2 years ago. I voted Conservative. Always did.
And which parts of the manifesto do you think were betrayed?
Most things, actually.
Right.
Most things.
So how does that make you feel ahead of this campaign? Do you look? I mean, it's Manifesto Week next week. The pledges and the promises will be laid out before us. Will you read them? Will you put any trust in them?
I find it very hard. I was listening to everyone tonight, and the only one who seemed honest was actually the Green Party, who I'd never considered before. But she seemed very honest. She wasn't fighting to get above everybody else. So I think she'll probably get my vote.
Yeah. I'm just interested what you both made of the general tenor of the debate. I mean, I don't know if you watched the leaders' debate on Tuesday, but this felt different to me.
I think the debate felt very pick me. It felt.
But maybe that's natural, given there are 7 people on stage and time is limited.
I do understand that. I think a lot of the times it was kind of, I think that the leaders speaking strayed from the British public, the British people, and kind of more focused on jabbing at each other as opposed to really having a clear point they wanted to communicate in the first
The
place.
pollsters, I think the jury's out for the pollsters on whether debates make a difference. Do they make a difference for you?
It certainly has tonight. It's opened my eyes to a few things.
What, because you're seeing a smaller party for the first time? I mean, was it an introduction for you to the Green Party?
Yes, it was.
Right.
It was. And Labour and Conservative, we see are the main ones. They're just fighting each other.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Lucy Lindo, it's lovely to meet you, and thank you for your contributions tonight.
Thank you.
Really good questions, as were all of them from our studio audience. At the end of the debate, after we'd had the row on stage and they were all fighting for the attention, they got a period of time to themselves, were able to give their closing thoughts and comments. So let's tune in to some of those. Here is a reminder of the closing thoughts that they gave to the audience.
After 14 years of chaos, it's time for change. Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. Our fully costed plan for Britain will secure our economy, will bring down NHS waiting times with 40,000 new appointments every week, and will secure our borders, not with gimmicks, but with a credible plan to smash the gangs. We'll create Great British Energy, bringing down bills and creating thousands of well-paid jobs. We'll boost neighbourhood police to tackle antisocial behaviour, and we'll hire 6,500 new teachers. So if you want change, vote Labour.
Stephen Flynn.
The Tories are finished, so the choice is simple. Who do voters best trust to put Scotland's interests first in Westminster? Now, in the SNP, we know what it is that we believe in. Investment in our NHS, action on the cost of living crisis, rejoining the European single market, and creating economic growth by delivering on net zero. Unlike the Labour Party, we will never, ever get comfortable with the Westminster status quo. We will always fight for Scotland's right to choose its own future. So on the 4th of July, vote to put Scotland's interests first. Vote SNP.
Carla Denyer.
We can all see the Tories are toast, thank goodness. But we deserve better than a Labour Party that is offering more of the same. Angela says that Keir has changed the Labour Party, and she's right. He's changed them into the Conservatives. Frankly, our children deserve better. The Green Party is on the cusp of breaking through in seats up and down the country. Green MPs will never stop defending our future, protecting our NHS from privatisation and pushing the next Labour government to do better. We deserve real hope and real change. Vote Green.
Rena Pureworth.
This evening, I've been able to stand up for Wales, yes, but also for a different kind of politics that hopefully has been able to feel relevant wherever you are. My vision is a positive one. This isn't as good as it gets. The Conservatives are gone. They are finished, and it can't come quickly enough. But there is a real chance here to send Labour a message too. Stop taking Wales for granted. It is true that communities throughout the UK feel as if they are being ignored. Well, I won't let Wales be. So vote Plaid Cymru on the 4th of July.
Penny Mordaunt.
We've come through tough times, and now there is a choice to be made. You can choose Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer and get higher taxes, higher bills, and have your pension raided. Or you can stick with us and the plan that is working. We will cut your taxes, we will protect your pension, and we will defend this nation. For a more secure future, vote Conservative.
Daisy Cooper.
Our country is crying out for change, and it's not hard to see why. Under this Conservative government, everything feels broken. Nothing works. Under Ed Davey's leadership, the Liberal Democrats will fix our NHS and social care, tackle the cost of living crisis, and put an end to the scandal of filthy raw sewage being dumped in our rivers and streams. Every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for a fair deal and a vote to help deliver the change that we all so desperately want and need.
Nigel Farage.
Unlike the other six, I don't need an autocue. I'm here because I believe in what I believe in. Our politics isn't working. You've heard these pathetic arguments tonight between the two big parties. Really, there isn't much difference. But electorally, Labour are going to win. The debate is who forms the opposition in the next Parliament? Who fights for the rights of ordinary British people? Who fights to control our borders? Who fights for men and women running small businesses? Reform UK is about to become a political phenomenon, an historic one. So I urge you, join the revolt.
Well, unlike Nigel Farage, I do need autocue, but we've not had it tonight, so I hope it's been somewhat coherent as we've worked through the various parties. Of course, the people who will make most sense of it for us will be the journalists, the newspaper journalists, through the course of the night. The headlines will be out very shortly on the front pages, and that's the sort of industry that you can feel above us. It's a bit around us. It's a bit like, though, the last hour in the nightclub. The sort of stragglers are here, the hangers-on and the stragglers. Here's two stragglers. I was just saying, it's like the end of a nightclub night, isn't it?
Yeah, we're always at the end of the night.
I
don't know what
nightclub you've been to.
One of us going to start crying in a minute.
Aisha Zarika, Salman Shah, Labour Conservative. What did you make of it?
I thought it was interesting. I thought the format meant that because there was just so many people on stage, nobody really got the chance to sort of dominate it. I think you could see the strategies in play. Penny Mordaunt was clearly coached to only attack Angela Rayner, not go anywhere near Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage was really trying to sock it to Penny Mordaunt. Stephen Flynn was trying to sock it to everybody. Yeah. It was just quite interesting in terms of how everybody had their game plan coming in.
They sort of tiptoed into it a little bit until Nigel Farage just piled in on the D-Day cock-up.
What I think was interesting about the D-Day stuff, I thought that Penny Mordaunt actually was interesting in the sense that she sort of put the boot into Rishi Sunak a bit as well. You know, she was quite forceful, saying, actually, I'm really sorry about what happened. It was a big mistake. And I thought that was quite an interesting moment for me.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about how you position people around the stage and whether they draw lots. I mean, you couldn't have, obviously, the energy and the row was at the right-hand side of the stage between Penny Mordaunt and Angela Rayner.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be sort of a sigh of relief at Conservative headquarters this evening, because what they expected was, you know, Nigel Farage, big figure, very popular, obviously climbing up in the polls to dominate this debate. And he didn't. I mean, that's my assessment of it anyway. I think it fell a little bit flat, and I think the energy, as you say, was very much between Penny and Angela. Given what I said previously, of course, is that I thought it would be much more dynamic, but there was this sense that they were almost coached into sort of being smaller versions of themselves. I thought Angela Rayner actually was very subdued and not quite what I had expected her to be. So it was.
I wonder what instructions she was sent out with, because caution has been the name of the game. If you're 20 points ahead in the polls, you can afford to be cautious. Was that maybe the instruction she was sent with?
I think there's definitely a theme running through the Labour Party. There's the famous Ming vase analogy. It's like, you know, carrying a Ming vase across a polished floor. And Labour's really conscious that, yes, the polls are looking good, but also the Labour Party doesn't often win elections. In the last 100 years, this country's only ever elected 4 Labour Prime Ministers. So they know that history is sort of against them. So I think there's definitely a sort of caution first. And I also think Angela Rayner probably didn't want to end up being the story of the night. So I think she was also, look, you know, Keir Starmer's trying to show that he's a Prime Minister in waiting. She's trying to show she's a Deputy Prime Minister in waiting. But what was interesting is that I thought Nigel Farage would really come in and have a big moment, because he is a good communicator. I don't agree with his politics, but he's often quite a dynamic, punchy. He sort of felt like he didn't quite have that knockout blow moment. And I thought this would be the sort of night where he'd come to really bury the Conservative Party. I didn't quite feel that happened.
These guys around us will be drawing their conclusions. Conservative HQ will be hoping that it's the debate that takes the front pages, but it's unlikely to be. This story about D-Day is going to run and run, isn't it?
I think actually Penny dealt with it quite deftly. I agree that with what Aisha just said, in that, you know, she wasn't quite as supportive of it as she might have been.
That'll be the story. That'll be the story.
And that is definitely going to run. I think the debate itself, I don't think anybody learnt anything new from it, and I think that is the sort of sad sort of result of
all this incredible coaching that goes on behind the scenes, where people actually don't feel as free to be able to say what they want about policy. And Nigel Farage did try and make that a sort of a distinctive point about himself, you know, not using the auto cue and all that. But I think that actually, did anybody learn anything that different from this debate this evening?
Our audience members who we just talked to, well, one of them had not really been introduced to the Greens. She quite liked the Greens. They thought Stephen Flynn had a good night, as you predicted he would. And so actually, I mean, the SNP aren't the smaller party. They're third biggest power in Westminster. But those parties that don't get as much airtime do tend to benefit more from this format.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think what's really instructive about these formats is for your average voter, it does give these smaller parties a chance to get into the spotlight, and it does give voters a chance to see that there are other options on the table other than like the big two parties. And as I said, as I predicted, I think, you know, Stephen Flynn is a good performer. He comes in with quite a strong message in terms of what he wants to deliver. But ultimately, I don't think tonight will have massively changed the polls. I don't think most people's voting intention will have shifted looking at this debate. You're seeing a holding pattern now, really, until the manifestos come out. That's going to happen sort of next week.
Just on that issue, it has been a very slick social media campaign from Labour this time around. There have been a lot of videos posted out by Labour Central Office. Do you think actually the debate format like this is a bit old hat, and actually most of this battle is being waged on the internet?
I think there's a lot of that. I think that's been happening consistently and increasingly since actually the referendum debate around Brexit. Certainly 2017 was a big lesson in that. I think if the debate format is going to change, I think people need to find a way to be more engaged with it. And I think partly people are turned off because it was Linda's question, who I think you spoke to earlier, which is everybody says they're going to change something, but they don't. And, you know, lots of the smaller parties are taking that trust issue and running with it. And I think if you're going to communicate with people, the starting position has to be a little bit of solid policy and a little bit of truth behind what you're saying, not just slogans.
But if that burning question is trust, and if the pollsters are saying nobody really believes we're getting to the detail, the nub of how the services are going to be paid for, is there a danger for Labour that actually people just don't go and vote?
Well, look, I think the Labour Party is aware that they cannot be complacent about this, and there's a huge feeling out there that people want to change, but Labour absolutely has to spell out what that change is going to be.
Do you think they have to do more in the final 3 or 4 weeks?
I think they will do more, and I think when the manifesto comes out, today was a really important day in terms of this Clause 5 meeting where the final bits of the manifesto are being agreed. That is going to be a big moment. It's a big moment for any party. It's particularly big for the Labour Party with the poll lead that they have, because look, people want to change, but people don't want to give any party a blank cheque. They want to know what Labour's positive vision is for the future, and that's something that Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves do want to set out. They want to say to people, look, this is our confident, optimistic vision for the future. This is how we're going to fix Britain after 14 years of Tory mismanagement, and they want to spell that out, and that's where the manifesto will be another really important point in the journey of this election campaign.
But things do fall apart when manifestos come out, you know, as we've both been veterans of election campaigns where that has happened. So I think that build up to the manifesto, what's going to be in there, how is it costed, I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny given Labour's poll lead on what are the policies and what does this actually mean. Because I also think, you know, as we're talking about with the smaller parties, what is going to be apparent is there going to be that much difference between Labour and the Conservatives and what they're offering? And I think people will really hone in on the details at that point.
Just a final thought on the manifestos. There has been some speculation that the Tories need something. Inheritance tax is being dangled. Do you think the Chancellor might decide to scrap inheritance tax?
I think if he does, I can see the logic for trying to win back some core support, but I think it's quite a difficult one. I think there's a lot of attack territory there that they don't want to open themselves to.
Listen, another unfunded tax cut for some of the wealthiest estates in the country is not going to go down well. Particularly there's a massive crippling cost of living crisis. The other thing I think we should look out for in the Conservative manifesto is leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. I think that's something that Rishi Sunak kind of dangled at the last leaders' debate. That's something Reform's going to be pushing them hard. There'll be a lot of division within the Conservative Party about doing that, because a lot of die-hard Conservatives are like, no, that's not the right thing to do. That's going to be something I'm looking at.
Brexit only got one look in tonight.
We discussed this earlier. It was fascinating because there was this pivot between immigration and Brexit, and Stephen Flynn challenged Nigel Farage on that. And of course, you know, the great thing that Farage was pushing during the Brexit referendum was around immigration and freedom of movement. And there didn't seem to be any kind of coherent thesis around what Reform was offering.
Well, I wondered that because we had Reform over at the table, and really there wasn't there wasn't a lot of detail on how they would do it differently.
Absolutely. And we were just discussing at our sort of table of sort of, our group, when Nigel Farage looked down the camera and said, we need a revolution, we need a revolution in this country. A lot of people on the table went, Brexit was meant to be the revolution. That was the thing that you pushed. That was the big, panacea to all the problems.
But does Labour need to do more on Europe?
Well, I think Labour doesn't want to relitigate Brexit because nobody wants
Not this side of the election.
Absolutely not.
But the
also,
other side?
Well, look, there's a big kind of renegotiation happening with the trading arrangements, and they have been clear saying that we would like to have a closer relationship with Europe. But I think we need to be realistic here. Nobody wants to relitigate the whole Europe thing now. And it's fine for Labour to be like, hi Europe, we're ready to come back, like the Nightmare X that has like caused you nothing but grief. We're like, do you know what? We're ready to take you back. Europe might have other plans right now.
Talking to the Nightmare X, we're all going to get chucked out. Yeah, no, we're all going to get thrown out of the nightclub. Listen, it's been a great pleasure. Selma, Aisha, thank you very much indeed. That's it from us here in the Spin Room. People are starting to drift away. Do remember, there's plenty of fact-checking on the website. The Verified team are working through what they've heard tonight. So go and have a look at that and all the clips there of the best bits of the debate as well. Thank you for watching. We'll hand you over to our BBC crews. Have a very good night.